I want to talk today about how the mass media can work for us in substance prevention. You might be surprised that after David Foxcroft's fine address that I'm actually going to bother doing this. But as a matter of fact, you'll also be surprised by the fact that I agree with everything that he said. But there's more to be said on this subject. So I'm going to start from the start and try to show you how media can be quite successfully used if you do it right. Basically, when you talk about mass media, you're really talking about three things. Mass media are out there to entertain you, to inform you, and sometimes to persuade you. We're usually focusing on the last part, the persuasion part, but in fact, if you don't have all three working for you at the same time, you're not going to succeed. Let me talk to you about media use in substance prevention context. I'm going to talk about information dissemination first. I'll leave off the entertainment part, even though we'll return to that in a minute. The entertainment function, I think, can be crucial in disseminating important and time-sensitive information. So a new drug on the street, you really got to get the message out there. And one of the best ways of doing that is by the mass media. You say, there's this drug out there, it's killing lots of people, don't use it. Or if you're having this sort of problem, or if you know have a friend who has an emergency, here's a helpline, or who is becoming addicted to something, here's a helpline you can do. So that information isn't persuasive at all, it's just informative. In terms of prevention, the information function is most useful in mass media when very little is known about the problem and attitudes aren't formed. Information alone, and here we agree, is usually not effective in motivating people to change established beliefs. It just doesn't work that way. However, I think we can throw the baby out with the bathwater on this fact, because if you don't provide information along with your persuasive appeal, you really don't have much to go on. So for example, a program recently run, or not recently, but run in the United States, Just Say No to Drugs. Okay, it was a big program, was sponsored by Nancy Reagan and so forth. The problem is it didn't tell you how to just say no. So what happens if your best friend comes up to you and says, hey, I got this joint, you want to smoke it, we're at a party, and so forth and so on. How do you say no to that? It turns out most kids didn't, because they didn't know how to. So there was no information that came along with that persuasive pitch, just say no, and consequently it failed. So that tells us that maybe we ought to parlay the informational function along with something else, which may be the persuasion function. Persuasion assumes, in my world, if I'm talking about persuasion, it means I'm trying to tell you something that you have an established belief that is contrary to what I'm saying. Okay, so it's a contest that we're engaged in. It is most effective when the attitudes I'm trying to change, the beliefs that I'm trying to change, aren't very strong, not well established. In that case, receivers are less resistant. People who I'm trying to change are less resistant and more willing to elaborate or to consider my message. But the media can be useful even in situations where the attitudes are quite strong. However, you have to assume at a baseline that you're going to get a less elaboration of your message. You're going to think about it less. They're going to be more prone to just say, no, 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 you're wrong. I don't want to hear about it. So it means you've got to create the message that forces or impels your audience to think about what you're saying. And you also got to understand that you're going to get more resistance. And this requires greater persuasive skill. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, the first thing you need to do is entertain. That is, you have to get people to attend to what you're doing. And one of the ways of doing that is by very fancy kinds of graphics and so forth. And I won't go into those, you've seen them all. But there has to be more to it than that. There was a great campaign run in the US called the This Is Your Brain on Drugs campaign, where you have a very pretty girl taking a hammer, or a frying pan with an egg and saying, this is your brain, and breaking it into the pan and having it sizzle, and over the sizzle she says, and this is your brain on drugs. And that was the end of the ad. Well, it got your attention. In fact, many of us, at my age at least, who saw that campaign, still remember it and without any problem. The problem was, though, that it didn't persuade anybody to do anything other than maybe have eggs for breakfast, because there was no message there as to what to do. So what do you do? Well, you create the message that years and years of research has told us makes a difference. The message should be given by a credible information source, somebody that your audience believes. It should be based on strong arguments. It should use logic, data, not threats or high emotional appeals. It should emphasize self-relevance or the vested interests of the individual to do what I'm telling you to do. And it should target the appropriate message to the appropriate group. This is difficult to do. And it is one of the reasons why we have failed so often. These difficulties have given rise to a history of what I call uninspiring in the media. And consequently, a series of explanations as to why this $8 million campaign failed. One of the reasons is, well, the campaign failed to reach a large enough audience, or the intended audience. Recent This Is Your Brain on Drugs campaign had a higher exposure rate than even Coca-Cola has. So that doesn't always work. The problem with that campaign was the ads were terrible. So the more people saw the ads, the more they realized these ads are crazy, they're stupid. Popular media that we deal with suggests that substance use is normative. So almost any TV show past 8 p.m. in the United States, you'll see people drinking whiskey. No matter what, something good happens, they have a drink. Something bad happens, they have a drink. Nothing happens, they have a drink. That seems to suggest that there's a lot of drinking going on. And if you're a youngster sort of trying to figure out what is the right normative behavior, you can pick it up from that. There is a gross overuse of fear-arousing messages. It seems that when somebody wants to do a media campaign, what they do, the first thing they go to is, let's scare the life out of our audience and make sure that they're so scared they'll never use drugs. That doesn't work very well. Running a fear campaign can be done, but you really need to know what you're doing, and most of the people who've tried them don't. We over-focus on information dissemination at the expense of persuasion. All of this is true. But to remedy this state of affairs, I propose that we don't give up, but rather let's do it right for change. And by doing that, I mean we apply established and extend these established principles of influence. And they are as follows. One of the things you need to do when you're trying to persuade somebody who's going to resist you is to create uncertainty, is to destabilize the belief that you're attacking. You have to then offer an alternative belief. Don't use this drug. And you have to provide some incentive for agreement. In the media case, you also have to understand how media influence is moderated through opinion leaders. That's another talk, and I won't have time for it today, but essentially what it means is the mass media aren't really made to move the masses. They're made to move the people who move the masses, the people who have others who listen to them. If I can persuade those people, who we'll call opinion leaders, through the process of interpersonal communication, they deal with their followers. And that is how the media actually works. And there's not plenty, but there's a reasonable amount of evidence that suggests that's the proper way to go. So it means we aim our persuasive appeals not to the mass, even though we're using mass media, but to the people who own the masses. If I want to formalize these ideas, it comes down to 4 steps, really. You have to attract and maintain attention to what you're saying. That's the entertainment function. You have to destabilizing the existing attitudes, that is question. You have to introduce a question into the cognitive system of the individual who you're trying to persuade. You have to provide plausible replacement information that is informative, and that you have to offer incentive for agreement, that is to persuade. This model is the EQIP model, the EQIP model, integrates the three critical functions of the mass media and supplies a reasonable and useful framework for mass media-based substance prevention. Here's an ad that was created by kids who've been playing around with these ideas. Yeah, you can sort of see it. The text is a set of lungs, obviously, and labeled true or false. When you smoke a joint, you inhale 4 times as much tar as in a cigarette, true or false. And the other lung says a teenage marijuana user is twice as likely to drop out of school as a non-user. When you flip this thing upside down, the answers are both are true. Now get all the facts. It doesn't tell you, where this ad fails a little bit, but this was made by a kid, is it doesn't really tell you what to do, but it tells you where to go to find it. And this logo is the logo of the Above the Influence campaign, a media campaign that works very, very well and is continuing to work for a while. It could be improved, but if I were 8 years old or 12 years old and made this ad I'd be very happy with myself. Because what it does is literally raise a question. It gives you some answers, but it doesn't really provide you, unfortunately, with the reinforcement to go, with the incentive to say, yeah, I better think seriously about this. So ideally, if you can integrate these functions, I believe it will maximize persuasive outcomes. I want to give you a study, I'll talk to you about a study that we did. It was an analog experiment. It's not really a mass media study, but it gets close to that, where we try to basically show people flashy ads, destabilize their pro-substance beliefs, rendering them more ambivalent, we think, offering alternatives that bypass resistance, and then incentivize acceptance. Here's what we did. We gathered about 650 kids, school kids, 12 to 15 years of age, and showed them a series of anti-substance videos drawn from a large sample. Each kid only saw one, but we analyzed across all of the ads so that the results are not ad specific. We chose out of those 650 kids, about 120, about a quarter of them, who were the most resistant, who disliked the ads. When we said, you know, how much do you like this ad? We picked the ones who hated them. Why? Because our previous research has showed that negative responses to persuasive anti-drug ads usually presage substance problems in the kids. Usually anticipate that this kid is going to intend and actually ultimately use drugs. And on the other hand, positive responses were usually associated with much lower likelihood of future usage, even when expressed by users. So if I'm a user and you showed me some anti-drug ads and I said, yeah, you know, I really like those were appealing to me, the chances that I'm going to continue to use are much lower than if I say I hated those things. So we wanted to expose the negative participants to communications designed to destabilize their beliefs, and then determine if they were more susceptible to a later persuasive appeal. So this is a 1-2 punch approach, where basically the first ad that I do or the first interaction that I have with a person is trying to make them question their established beliefs regarding positive substance beliefs. Just making you question them doesn't change you, however. And if I don't do anything after that, I've lost the game. But making you question your own beliefs, at that point you are much more susceptible to a second persuasive appeal. So that's the general format of what we did. So here's what the study sort of looks like. We have a pretest. People view the first ad. The kids viewed the first ad. They evaluated it. We had our machine. This was all done online, basically. Every kid was sitting in front of their own computer. And the computer picked out the kids who disliked the ads. It gave them feedback, saying various levels. We didn't know what would destabilize the best, so I'm going to talk to you about that in a second. And then we asked them to reevaluate the ad. We thought that this may create ambivalence, create destabilization. We wanted to know which technique worked best to do that. We then gave them a second ad to see, and then we measured their attitudes and intentions to use marijuana. These ads were on cannabis or marijuana. So destabilization, after they saw the ad and told us they didn't like it, whichever the ad was, they got one of 4 different messages. Computer sort of cranked around and said, it seems you didn't like the ad. There are other people who also did not like it. Researchers have studied these people. The experts have found these people are very childish. Now you say that to a 10 or 15-year-old kid, they don't like it very much. But it does make them think seriously about, what really? The second one says, it seems you did not like these ads. Pick the top 3 reasons out of 10 that we presented why you didn't like it. So the kid picks 3. And then the computer cranks a bit and then gives them this message. Experts have studied the reasons people could have for disliking the ad. They all graded the reasons you picked as childish. Now notice a difference here, and it's a subtle one. In one case, we're calling the kid childish. In another case, we're saying, well, those reasons are kind of stupid, but you not. The third one says, this was an attributional approach where essentially we said, okay, write down the 8 reasons. It seems you didn't like the ad. Please list 8 reasons why you think the ad was bad. Kid starts typing, and if the ad was only a minute long. So it's very hard to come up with 8 reasons. Attributionally, we think, what you're going to do is think, gee, I can't come up with 8 reasons to think why this thing is bad. Maybe it's really not as bad as we thought. I'll tell you at the outset, that didn't work. It would work on you, adults, but at least there's a large literature that suggests it would. But on kids, it doesn't work very well. They're not that self-reflective. And the fourth group was a control group. They didn't get anything. After they did this, we said, we're testing new question formats. Please evaluate the ads once again with these new measures. These were parallel forms of attitude scales. Here's what we found. This was what we're looking for, what works best. And if you look at this, what you'll find is that feedback 2, the reasons you gave were childish, work is far and away statistically better than all of the others. These error bars don't overlap between number 2 and everything else. So obviously that's the one that we went with or are going with now in some follow-up research. So we found one of the things that really made, one of the treatments that really seemed to make a difference. And what does that mean? Well, were these results that we found related on that attitude toward the ad, were they related to ambivalence? Was ambivalence playing a role here? So this is a mediation question, and I don't want to get into the statistics of mediation, but basically it's asking, are these effects that you're getting on attitudes being worked through the process of ambivalence creation? Okay, it's as simple as that, although the stats are a little bit hairy to do. And the results suggest, yeah, oh nuts, this didn't work right. Okay, let's look at the bottom line here, where what you see at first is we looked at the approach that worked best versus the 2 others that didn't. We didn't put the control group in this comparison because it would really bias the effects in my favor, so I thought everyone would scream at me, so we kept it out. If I threw it in, it would be even better. You get a direct effect on that bottom line. I don't know how to use the light here. It must be somewhere here. Yeah, right here. So if you look at that bottom line, what you see is that the difference between this group and these other 2 on attitudes is strong and statistically significant of 0.44. However, we think that effect is working through ambivalence, attitudinal ambivalence. So here what we find is that is exactly what's happening. This effect works very nicely. There's a strong and significant effect between the treatment and ambivalence works very, very strongly on the attitudes, and in fact it renders this effect then, it eats up the effect that renders the bottom effect insignificant. So what we've come up with is a technique to destabilize what the subject felt in terms of his attitude. We presented an alternative. The alternative gets accepted, and it actually makes change on the attitude. What I'm not going to show you, but I could have, which would look pretty much the same as this, is the important idea here is we also ask kids' intentions to use marijuana in the future. That is a good measure for actual usage. There's tons of research out there looking at the intention-behavior relationship, and it's quite strong. And we get exactly the same results as we're getting here. So we not only change the children's attitudes toward marijuana, but also their intentions to use that drug in the future. So here's the reprise. I have no argument with the fact that media prevention research has not done very well. It hasn't. But I have a lot of argument with how it's been done. We have 50 or 60 years of hard-headed experimental research on persuasion sitting out there in the social psychology and communication literature. It's beautiful research, it's well done, and it is widely ignored in many of the media campaigns that have been used. Am I surprised that these campaigns failed? No, I'm not. In fact, I would be disappointed if they didn't fail. So what I'm suggesting is we take the research seriously and do the next 10 years of good media research, and then ask David what the Cochrane reports will say then. And my guess is, if we knock out all of that bad stuff that's been done in the past and look at the new models, that what we'll get is something that actually makes a difference. But we got to get the word out, and we got to get people to pay attention. The difficulty is that lots of times in many circumstances, and I've been involved in some of them, an administrator will get money to do a media campaign, and their first thought is, okay, let's get out there and scare people. And you know, it takes a lot to get people not to do that. So here's what you do. You destabilize pro-substance attitudes. Making it ambivalent, creating uncertainty. The uncertainty renders the attitude susceptible to change. A new persuasive message is less likely to be resisted, leading to less positive attitudes and lower intentions to use the substance in the future. That's precisely what we found in this study, and I maintain it's precisely what you will find in your studies if you follow these rules. Thank you very much.